My name is Julia Preston, and this is the moment I burned my whole family dinner to the ground. I tossed the keys of a brand new Mustang, right there in the middle of my father's polished mahogany dining room, and said, "She left it all to me because she saw what you really are." His jaw dropped so hard I thought it might break the china. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments. I want to know how far the truth travels. The frosting had just started to melt under my fingers when the phone buzzed. One hand steadying the birthday cake, vanilla sponge, blue and white frosting, silver candles, I reached for the phone with my other. "Please come." "It's urgent," came my grandmother's voice, thin, dry as brittle paper, and final. "Grandma," I straightened. My hands were sticky with icing and my heart dropped like a stone in a cold lake. "I need to see you, Julia, tonight." No pleasantries. No time to soften it. Just those few words, and Evelyn didn't say things she didn't mean. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, turned toward the family room. My dad was fiddling with the stereo, trying to get some playlist of 70s hits to work. My mom stood at the counter, slicing fruit she'd arranged into a perfect spiral. And Zach, my younger brother, 14 and wide-eyed, sat on a stool, slowly peeling a clementine, watching everyone and saying nothing. "I need to go," I said. My dad looked up just as the opening riff of Sweet Home Alabama stuttered out of the speaker. "Go where?" Grandma called. "She said she needs me, tonight." He stared at me like I'd just announced I was defecting to a rival country. "You're leaving on my birthday." The room went still. Even the fruit knife paused midair in my mother's hand. "It's important, Dad. She didn't sound well." He stepped toward me. "Unbelievable. You always ruin everything, always." His voice rose, fast and sharp. Just once, can't you think about someone else?" "Someone else?" My voice cracked. "She's alone, Dad. She asked for me. She's not just someone else. She's your mother." "You don't know what she's like," he snapped. "You think she's some sweet old lady, but she's manipulative, always has been." Mom stayed silent, eyes on the fruit, not daring to look up. Zach's fingers were frozen mid-peel. "I'm going," I said simply. Dad's face twisted. "Right in the middle of your father's birthday cake. You've always been dramatic, ever since you were a kid." "Well, go then, run to her like you always do." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, shoved my feet into my sneakers. "She said it was urgent," I repeated. "Some things matter more than cake." And I meant it. Zach stood as I opened the door, but our eyes only met for a second. His were full of something I couldn't read yet. My mother finally spoke as the door creaked open. "We were supposed to be a family tonight." I didn't look back when I whispered, "We're not really." The air outside was colder than I expected. The porch light flickered above me as I stepped out into the night. I didn't know what Evelyn was about to tell me. I didn't know yet what that call would unravel. But in that moment I knew one thing for certain. Whatever waited on the other side of the drive to her house, it had to be better than what I was leaving behind. 2 days later, the world felt quieter, like it was holding its breath. The long drive to Cooperstown was lined with frost-laced trees, bare and skeletal in the early winter light. I pulled up to Grandma Evelyn's Victorian house just as the afternoon sun began dipping behind the hills. It stood like a sentinel from another time. Slate blue shutters, gingerbread trim, ivy frozen to the brick, and the curtains drawn just slightly askew as if someone had been watching for me. I knocked twice, then let myself in. The warmth hit me like a memory. Clove and orange. Cedar. Time itself lived in this house, tucked between bookshelves and the ticking grandfather clock that had stood sentry in the hallway since before I was born. "Julia!" Her voice called from the parlor. I found her in her usual chair, a wool shawl around her thin shoulders, hair silver and swept up in a soft bun. Her eyes, though sharp as always, eyes that could cut straight through pretense. "Hi, Grandma," I said, sinking onto the couch across from her. I hadn't realized until then how tired I was. She looked me over, then offered a small, knowing smile. "You came. You asked. That still means something to you." "Yes." Evelyn reached over to the side table, pulled open the drawer, and handed me a folded envelope with my name written in the cursive I'd recognize anywhere. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. "I need you to be brave, Julia, and silent for now, until the time is right." I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, and a legal document. My stomach flipped as I read the words, line by line. "She left it all to you," came another voice from the corner of the room. I turned. A man in a gray suit stepped forward, holding a black leather briefcase. I'd seen him once or twice before at family weddings or funerals. "Julia, this is Mr. Alden," Evelyn said calmly. "My attorney." He nodded politely. I've handled your grandmother's affairs for nearly 15 years, and as of yesterday morning, the revised will has been filed with the state. Everything is in order. Revised? I asked, still blinking at the words on the page in my hands. Property deeds, trust allocations, accounts and investments, numbers so large they didn't feel real. All assets, homes, stocks, investments, liquid funds, totaling approximately $4.3 million, Alden confirmed. All to you, sole beneficiary. I couldn't speak, not right away. Evelyn watched me with quiet intensity. I know it's a lot, she said, voice softer now. And I know it'll get complicated, but I need you to promise me something. I don't understand, I finally said, folding the papers slowly. Why me? Because you still look people in the eye when you speak, because you listen more than you talk, and because you haven't yet learned how to smile while stabbing someone in the back. That stung because I knew exactly who she was talking about. They'll come sniffing when I'm gone, she went on. And they'll lie through perfect teeth and cry without tears. Don't say a word about this yet. Let them show you who they really are. Alden closed his briefcase with a click. Miss Preston, I've been instructed to maintain full confidentiality. No one else knows about the will. I'll notify the family after the funeral. Until then, discretion is yours. I nodded slowly, the weight of the envelope still firm in my hands. Why trust me with this? I asked her, voice small. Evelyn leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on mine. Because they've taken from me all their lives. You're the only one who never asked for more than a story and a cup of tea. I swallowed hard. I won't say a word, I whispered. Evelyn sat back, her eyes closing for a moment. Good, then you'll see their true faces. The fire crackled gently. Outside, a crow called once from a frozen tree branch. The room was dim but warm. Books lined the walls in tall, dust-scented towers. The same floral teacups from my childhood still sat in their display case. For a moment, it felt like time had folded in on itself. Like I was 10 again, curled up on that same sofa, Evelyn reading poetry aloud with the snow falling behind her. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was holding a secret that could shatter the people I'd grown up with. The inheritance didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a test. And I just promised not to fail it. Rain blurred the stained glass of the chapel windows like smeared watercolors. The kind of soft, persistent drizzle that didn't thunder, just settled into your bones and made everything feel slower, heavier. I stood near the back pew alone, my black coat damp at the sleeves, watching droplets slide down the side of Grandma Evelyn's polished mahogany casket. The priest spoke in the gentle, generic tone reserved for small funerals, kind but distant. A few neighbors sat scattered throughout the chapel, their heads bowed politely. Two of Grandma's old book club friends sat in the third row, clutching floral handkerchiefs. That was it. My parents entered just as the priest began reading from Psalms. My father's coat was a deep navy with gold buttons, practically gleaming in the dim light. My mother's umbrella snapped shut as she stepped inside in red-bottomed heels, her tailored dress dry and spotless, as if the rain had parted just for her. I heard my father whisper to her as they passed the aisle, I told you she wouldn't have left a cent. She probably spent it all on antique cookbooks and those ridiculous cats. My mother sniffed. All that fuss over homemade soup and dusty furniture. If she left behind anything worth money, it's probably moldy by now. They slid into the front row like it was a fashion show, not a funeral. Dad crossed one leg over the other, polished shoes gleaming. Mom adjusted her pearl earrings and reached for the program with the kind of practiced elegance that made everything feel like a performance. I stayed in the back, jaw tight, hands clenched in the pockets of my coat. The service passed in a blur of shallow prayers and damp silence. When it ended, the priest invited us to say a few words. No one stood, so I did. I stepped up to the small wooden lectern. My voice was steady, if a little hoarse. Evelyn Preston was the strongest woman I ever knew. She didn't ask for attention, she didn't demand praise, but she gave more than most people ever noticed. She taught me that silence often says more than noise. I glanced toward the front pew. My mother rolled her eyes and leaned in to whisper something to my father, who smirked. She deserved your respect, I said, eyes locked on theirs now. Not mockery. My mother turned halfway toward me, arching an eyebrow like I was an actor missing her cue. Oh, Julia, she always played favorites. Don't act surprised she wrapped you around her finger, she said lightly, voice loud enough to carry. You're just doing what you've always done, making everything about you. gasps from the pews behind her, my father didn't even flinch. He simply stood and offered her his arm like the curtain was about to fall. She was my grandmother, I said quietly. She mattered to me. She mattered to you because she spoiled you, my father added, adjusting his cufflinks. And when the wool comes out, don't expect much. Your grandmother always lived in a fantasy, and you were her favorite little sidekick. I didn't respond, because I had the papers tucked in my bag, because I knew exactly what was coming, and because I had promised Evelyn I'd wait. Let them reveal themselves. My silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. After the casket was lowered and the guests drifted off, I stayed behind while the chapel emptied. The rain picked up slightly, tapping against the roof like fingers on a drum. Ak was the only one who lingered at the back steps, waiting near the old coat rack. He didn't speak, just looked at me through the drizzle, then slowly nodded once, like he knew there was more I wasn't saying. I nodded back. Then I turned and walked out into the rain, letting it wash the bitterness from my face. But nothing could clean the taste of their words from my mouth, and nothing could prepare them for the storm they'd already seeded. The next morning, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon oatmeal and scorched pride. I hadn't meant to come back to the house. Not so soon, not after the funeral. But the rent on my apartment was due in 4 days. And despite what I now carried in my bag, Evelyn's will, the weight of $4.3 million, I had promised her I wouldn't touch it until everything revealed itself. Until I saw the truth. So I walked into the kitchen with my coat zipped up to the chin, heart pounding louder than the coffee maker sputtering on the counter. My parents were seated exactly where I knew they'd be. My mother on her iPad, reading the news with one finger delicately poised on the screen. My father with a crossword puzzle, pencil tapping against the table in slow, rhythmic impatience. The sun hit the countertop in a pale stripe, but the whole house still felt like it hadn't fully woken up. Neither of them looked up. I stood for a second in the doorway, then cleared my throat. Can I talk to you both? My mother blinked up at me with the same blank expression she wore at the funeral, somewhere between polite disinterest and mild condescension. Now, she said, I'm still finishing my coffee. Dad didn't even glance up. Make it quick. I stepped forward. My voice didn't come out shaky, but it didn't feel steady either. I need help with rent this month, I said plainly. $1,500. The silence was instant and sharp. Then my father started laughing. Not a chuckle. A full-bodied, shoulders-shaking laugh that sent his pencil clattering onto the table. Oh, he said between laughs. Oh, that's rich. My mother raised an eyebrow and let out a soft, mocking sigh. Let me guess, you didn't budget, did you? I warned you when you took that apartment. Too much space for someone without a real job. I have a job, I said. It's just things were tight. And I'm asking because I thought maybe. You thought what? Dad cut in, finally looking up. After storming out during my birthday and making that little speech at the funeral, we'd hand you a check. You think we owe you something now because you read a poem and played dress-up at a casket? Mom added. I clenched my hands at my sides. No, I thought maybe, despite everything, you could help me just this once. He stood, wiping his hands with exaggerated flair. Julia, if you can't even manage rent, then no wonder you ran off to Grandma every time life got hard. You've always been. Soft, soft, I echoed, the word cold in my mouth. You wanted independence, he said. This is what it looks like, scraping by, learning the hard way, we're not bailing you out. I heard a quiet creak, my eyes shifted toward the stairwell. Zach was there, barefoot, hoodie half-zipped, leaning silently against the railing, watching everything. His eyes met mine, and for a second I saw something flicker, shame maybe, or anger, but not at me. Back in the kitchen, Mom had returned to her screen. Have expenses too, you know, real ones. College fund for your brother, mortgage, retirement accounts. We can't just hand out money to anyone who strolls in with a sob story. Dad was already pulling the fridge open, casually checking the orange juice like this conversation hadn't just gut-punched the last shred of my goodwill. Thanks, I said quietly, for confirming everything. Mom looked up again. What's that supposed to mean? I met her gaze, calm, flat. It means Grandma was right. You're exactly who she thought you were, she scoffed, rolling her eyes again. Don't start the martyr act, Julia. You're not the first person to get told no. I turned, my coat still zipped, and walked toward the door without another word. As I reached the hall, I heard Dad mutter behind me, 1,500, she must really be desperate. I paused just long enough to say, loud enough for the stairwell to hear, you'll wish I had been. And then I walked out. No tears, no theatrics. Just the quiet confirmation that Evelyn hadn't just left me her estate, she'd left me the truth, and it stung in all the places I'd hoped it wouldn't. The following day, I sat on the steps outside my apartment building, a lukewarm coffee growing cold in my hands and yesterday's conversation still echoing in my head. My parents had made their position clear, help wasn't coming. But Evelyn's voice returned to me like a whisper against my collarbone. Find out who they really are. And so I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on the name I hadn't touched in over a year, Melanie Hanover, cousin on my dad's side. Grew up in Connecticut, went to college in California, and now floated somewhere between reality and designer Instagram filters. She and her twin brother, Josh, were born into wealth and only got wealthier. The kind of people who threw charity galas for dogs and posted about self-care from Bali. I tapped call. Answered on the second ring. Julia, wow, unexpected, everything okay? Her voice was sugar with just enough edge to cut the inside of your cheek. I inhaled once before answering. Hey Mel, do you have a minute? I heard wind in the background and the unmistakable sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass. I'm by the pool, she said breezily. But yeah, go ahead. I kept it short, clean. I need a loan, $1,500, just for this month, rent. She didn't respond right away, then. That one sound told me everything. In the background, a male voice chimed in. Josh. Who's that? Julia, she replied. She needs money, I winced. There was a pause. I imagined them lounging on matching white deck chairs, sunglasses pushed up, skin glowing from sun and good lighting, expressions flat with casual judgment. Melanie came back on. Listen, we don't really do casual loans. Especially not without, some kind of security. Security, I repeated. Collateral, Josh added, now clearly on speaker. Something we can hold if you default. A ring, laptop, your car. I don't have a car, I said, not yet anyway. Well, we could do it, Melanie offered. But we'd have to treat it like an investment, something official. 2,000% interest, Josh said with a mock formality in his voice. Over 6 weeks, payable in full or we sell the collateral, standard stuff. I blinked at the sidewalk. 2,000%. Relax, Melanie said with a chuckle. It's not as bad as it sounds, your family. Exactly, Josh echoed. We wouldn't even offer it if you weren't, just being smart with our money. For a second, I let silence stretch between us, long enough to make them slightly uncomfortable. Then I said what I knew they'd never expect. Okay, Melanie laughed. Wait, seriously? Sure, I said, voice light. You're just being smart, right? They started going over logistics. When I'd drop off the item, when repayment would be expected, legal terms I half listened to while watching a couple across the street walking hand in hand, sharing a hot pretzel and laughing about something too far away to hear. Melanie asked if I still had that bracelet Evelyn had given me when I was 16, the antique gold one with the emerald clasp. That'll do just fine, she said with a satisfied hum when I confirmed. Send it over tomorrow. Sure, I said, I'll bring it by myself. Josh added, bring ID just so we can keep everything clean. Of course. I ended the call. Then I leaned back against the railing and let out a slow breath through my nose. My fingers tightened around the coffee cup until it crinkled. Not because I was angry, not because I was hurt, but because I'd never felt so certain. The mask was off. The shiny exterior, the family brunches with white napkins and fake hugs and polite Christmas cards, it was all surface. Paper thin, beneath it, interest rates and fine print and cold math. They'd offered me a shark's deal like they were handing me a life raft. I said yes, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to see them show their teeth. This was Evelyn's test. And they were failing, one by one. Downtown was busy for a Tuesday. I slipped between joggers and dog walkers, sidestepped a delivery van idling half on the curb, and stood for a moment across the street from Clarice's place. The awning was still the same pale yellow striped fabric it had been since I was 15, though it was starting to fade near the edges. The glass windows sparkled, warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk. Inside, the boutique cafe was filled with the hum of jazz, the clink of cups, and the soft roar of the espresso machine. I adjusted my scarf and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately, almond, vanilla, and something toasted. Every detail was perfectly curated. Mismatched vintage chairs, copper teapots, stacks of indie magazines no one really read. Clarice had always prided herself on being charmingly curated. She spotted me right away. Aunt Clarice, my dad's older sister, was seated at her usual corner table, latte in hand, glasses perched low on her nose as she paged through a leather notebook. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, voice silk-wrapped with sarcasm. "Didn't expect to see you so soon after Evelyn's farewell parade." I gave a small smile and approached slowly. "Hi, Aunt Clarice." She closed the notebook with a deliberate snap. "So, what brings you downtown? You didn't come all this way just for a croissant." I hesitated a moment, then sat opposite her. "I was hoping we could talk. I could use a place to stay for a bit, just a room. Temporarily." Clarice raised one perfectly shaped brow. "Oh," I nodded. "I thought maybe if there's a vacancy at the hostel, the family-owned hostel," she corrected, taking a long sip of her latte. "Julia, you do remember I run that as a business, yes, it's not a free-for-all for relatives who suddenly feel nostalgic." "I wasn't asking for free," I said calmly. "Just a short stay, until next month." Clarice gave a small, dry laugh. "Of course. Because when family shows up, it's always just until next month." She leaned forward. "Market rate is $910 a week. I'll give you a discount, $875. Room 3 is open." I blinked. "You'd charge me that much?" "I'd charge you less than I charge strangers. That is family pricing." She smiled over the rim of her mug like she'd just offered me a seat on a yacht. I took a breath. "You knew Grandma wouldn't have wanted you to treat me like a stranger." Clarice sighed, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "Evelyn played favorites, you know it, always slipping you extra cookies at holidays, always whispering in your ear like you were her little secret. She never supported my business, not once, but she'd rave about your high school art like it belonged in the Met." "That's not true," I said quietly. "Isn't it?" Her tone was sharp now. "She had opinions. And so do I. You can have the room if you pay like everyone else. No one floats through life on Evelyn's ghost." I stood slowly. "I'd rather sleep in my car than owe you a favor," I said clearly, eyes not leaving hers. Several customers nearby glanced up from their mugs. A woman paused mid-sip. A man lowered his phone just enough to watch. Clarice gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well then, I hope your upholstery's comfortable." I turned without another word, walking past the tile counter and out the glass door. The bell jingled behind me like a final laugh. Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my scarf higher and headed down the sidewalk. I didn't look back, not even once. There was nothing warm inside that cafe anymore. Just almond lattes and bitterness served in vintage cups. The light in my apartment flickered when I switched it on, humming faintly like it, too, was tired of everything. I kicked off my boots and stepped over the stack of unopened mail that had been growing like a weed by the front door. The radiator hissed to life, working overtime to keep the drafty studio from dipping into full Arctic mode. I didn't bother turning on music or making tea. I just sat, right there on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, surrounded by the quiet clutter of a life in transition. Envelopes spilled out of the basket beside me, rent reminders, medical insurance updates, utility bills with threatening red lettering in the corners. I sorted through them slowly, not even opening most. There was nothing inside I hadn't already memorized. I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. Evelyn's voice came to me again, crisp and unwavering. "See their true faces." Well, I had. I saw my father's smirk when I asked for help, my mother's pearl-polished indifference, Melanie's interest rates, Clarice's latte-sipping sarcasm. Each one had peeled back their smiles like masks after Halloween, revealing something colder, smaller, and more calculating underneath. I hadn't touched Evelyn's money. I hadn't even logged into the account. That wasn't what this was about. It was about knowing. About watching the shape of people change when they think there's nothing left for them to gain from you. The buzzy whine of my old phone on the coffee table broke the silence. Unknown caller. I stared at it for a second, debating. Then I picked up. "Hello," a pause, then, "It's me, Zach." My stomach flipped in a way I wasn't ready for. His voice was lower than usual and hesitant, careful, like he was testing the temperature of the words before fully stepping into them. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course," I said immediately, sitting up straighter. "What's wrong?" "I don't want to say it on the phone. Can we meet tonight if you're free?" I glanced at the time. Nearly 9:00. My apartment was freezing, the bills were still staring me down, and I hadn't eaten since a stale muffin at noon. But none of that mattered. "Yeah," I said softly. "Where?" There was a pause, then, "That little park by the lake, the one with the old swings." I smiled faintly, picturing the crooked metal swing set we used to fight over during summers when Grandma would bring us both down to feed the ducks. I remember, I said. I'll be there in 20. Before he could hang up, I stopped him. Zach. Yeah, my voice was quiet now, barely above a whisper. You're the only one I still want to believe. There was silence on the other end. Then, just as gently, I hope I'm worth that. Click. I sat there for another few seconds, the phone warm against my palm, and something I hadn't felt in days started to surface, something unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Hope. Not because Zach had answers, but because he'd called. Because unlike everyone else, he hadn't waited until I had something they wanted. He came first. And that meant more than any inheritance. I got up slowly, brushing off my jeans, grabbed my coat from the hook and headed out into the night. The bills could wait. This, whatever Zach had to say, couldn't. The lake hadn't frozen yet, but it was close. The air carried that hollow, biting chill that made every breath feel thin. I tugged my coat tighter as I made my way down the slope toward the rusting swing set. The park was empty, just how I remembered it, quiet, forgotten, a hidden patch of shoreline that belonged more to ghosts than people now. Zach was already there. He stood near the water's edge, hands shoved into the pockets of his hood pulled up against the wind. His back was straight, but his shoulders were tense, like he was bracing himself for something he hadn't decided how to say. I crunched across the gravel toward him. He turned when he heard me and offered a crooked smile. Hey. Hey, I said, trying to match the lightness but feeling the weight in his eyes. You look like you've been standing here a while. Didn't want to change my mind, he said softly. That stopped me. What do you mean? He pulled something from his pocket, an envelope, thick, worn, creased at the corners. My heart skipped. He held it out to me with both hands. It's $1,500 in cash, I blinked. What? He nodded, eyes fixed on mine. I've been saving it, since I was, 12. Every time Dad gave me lunch money, I'd keep a little back. A couple dollars here, $5 there. Sometimes I just skipped lunch and told the cafeteria lady I wasn't hungry. He gave a sheepish shrug. I didn't even know why I was saving it, just felt like I'd need it someday or someone would. Zach, I started, but my voice broke. I want you to have it, he said, and the way he said it left no room for debate. Not as a loan, not as a favor, just because. You're the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered even when I didn't have anything to give. My throat tightened. My arms dropped to my sides. I stared at the envelope, then back at him. You're a kid. I'm 16, he said quickly. And I've seen everything. You think I didn't notice how they treated you? I noticed. I just didn't know what to do. He looked away, biting his lip. But I do now. I stepped forward and took the envelope from his hands. It was heavier than it looked. Paper thick with history. Folded years of self-denial and quiet loyalty. I held it to my chest. Then I hugged him, tight. He hesitated for a second, then wrapped his arms around me like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to hug him back. We stood like that for a long time. The lake murmured behind us. Leaves rustled gently along the frozen grass. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and dark, the stars dim behind thin clouds. When I finally pulled back, my cheeks were damp. Wasn't sadness. Not really. No, I said, brushing a hand across his shoulder. You're the only one who doesn't owe me a thing. He blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I smiled through the sting in my chest. You gave without expecting anything. That's more than anyone else has done for me. That's more than anyone else can do. He looked down. I just wanted to help. You did more than that, I said. You reminded me that not everything's fake. He kicked at a rock with the toe of his shoe. You know, I thought maybe you'd be mad I didn't speak up earlier. I shook my head. I wasn't ready to hear the truth until I saw it for myself. A silence stretched between us, one that didn't hurt this time. Then he asked, so what now? I looked out over the lake. The reflection of the moon was wobbly in the water, but it was still there. I think it's time I stop waiting for them to change, I said, and start showing them who I've become. Zach grinned faintly. That sounds dangerous. Only if you've got something to hide. He laughed just once, but it was real. And for the first time in what felt like weeks, I breathed without a weight on my chest. We didn't talk much after that. We sat on the swings, him kicking slowly at the gravel, me leaning back with the envelope still warm in my coat pocket. No schemes. No masks. Just two people who still believed in each other when everything else had tried to pull us apart. The next morning, I woke up with the envelope still on my nightstand and a thought burning in my chest. Zach had given me everything he had, years of quiet sacrifice, lunch money stashed away while the rest of us had no idea, not because he wanted to be praised, not because he expected anything, just because he could. And somehow, that made it worth more than the entire fortune sitting in my name. So I made a decision before the sun was fully up. I showered, dressed, and tied my hair back like it was any other day. But when I stepped out of my building, I didn't head to work or to the grocery store or back to the park. I drove to the edge of town. To the one place I knew no one would expect me to go. The glass showroom of Carrington Auto House gleamed like a polished jewel on the corner of Main and Ashby. Every car inside sparkled under the lights like it had just been born. I pulled open the heavy front door, heels clicking softly on the white tile floor. A sales associate spotted me immediately, tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tailored vest that said he took the job personally. "Good morning," he said, all smooth charm and practiced poise. "Looking for anything special?" I pointed without hesitation to the car in the center of the showroom. A metallic blue Mustang. It looked like velocity wrapped in steel. Low-slung, muscular, the kind of car that didn't just drive, it announced itself. "That one," I said. He blinked. "You've got good taste. That's the GT Premium package, not cheap." "I'm not here for cheap," I said, stepping closer to the gleaming hood. I could see my reflection warped slightly in the curve of the metal. "I'm here for something that means something," he chuckled. "Well, if that car doesn't scream meaning, I don't know what does." We walked around it slowly, his voice weaving through specs and upgrades. Engine strength, heated seats, sound system, custom paint. I nodded at all the right places but didn't really listen. Because I already knew what this car was. It was his. He just didn't know it yet. We sat down at his desk. I pulled out a checkbook, Evelyn's checkbook, now legally mine, and filled out the number in careful, smooth strokes. No trembling, no second-guessing. The salesman, his name tag read Dean, looked at the check, then back at me. "You said this was for someone." "My brother," I said, sliding the check toward him. "He gave me more than money ever could." Dean leaned back slightly, fingers resting on the edge of the paper. "People come in here all the time," he said slowly. "Buying cars to show off, to look richer, to get even with someone, but that." He glanced out at the Mustang, then back at me. "That's rare, giving something just to say thank you." I didn't respond right away. I was thinking about Zach's hoodie, his worn-out sneakers, the way he looked down when he spoke, like he didn't expect people to listen. "He doesn't know how rare he is," I said. "But he will." Dean smiled, small and genuine. "Not many people would give that kind of gift. He earned it." We shook hands. I signed the final paperwork. By the time I stepped out of the dealership, the key fob was cool in my palm and the sky had shifted into the soft gold of late morning. The kind of light that made the world look briefly, impossibly gentle. The Mustang sat waiting, all polished metal and quiet power. But it wasn't mine. It was his. The first real gift I had ever given anyone, without strings, without expectations, just the truth. And it was only the beginning. Sunday dinner at my parents' house always came with a script. Dad would pour himself a glass of red from the bottle labeled "not cheap." Mom would talk about real estate trends she didn't understand. And everyone would pretend they liked each other just enough to get through the meal. But not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't showing up to keep peace. I was showing up to end the performance. The Mustang's engine purred beneath me as I turned onto the long, curved driveway of the house I used to call home. The mansion loomed just as coldly as I remembered, 3 stories of pride and granite, with hedges so trimmed they looked afraid to grow. I parked dead center in front of the stone steps. The metallic blue paint caught the porch lights just right. Every detail gleamed, every inch unmistakably expensive, unmistakably deliberate. Zach was already inside. He'd texted earlier asking if I was still coming. I told him I was bringing a surprise. I didn't knock. I walked through the front door like I belonged. The murmur of voices floated from the dining room. Laughter, Mom's high and artificial, Melanie's softer but smug, the clink of silverware on porcelain. I stepped into the doorway and waited. It took them a second to notice me. Then, "Oh," my mother said, mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "She made it, and she brought that." She was looking past me at the car, still visible through the open front door. Dad leaned over his chair, eyes narrowing. "You finally borrow enough to play dress-up," Melanie blinked. "Wait, is that yours?" "No way," Josh added. "You couldn't even afford rent last week." I walked in slowly, letting the silence stretch. Zach looked up from his seat at the far end of the table, eyes wide, confused but waiting. I stopped beside him, pulled the keys from my coat pocket, and tossed them lightly onto the table. The clatter echoed across the crystal glasses. "They're yours," I said to Zach. He froze. "What?" "That car," I said. "The Mustang, it's yours." The table went still, dead still. My father's jaw slackened. My mother's eyes narrowed. Melanie tilted her head as if she hadn't quite heard right. Josh scoffed. "Okay, what?" I turned toward the rest of them and smiled, calmly, like I had all the time in the world. "Grandma left everything to me," I said, "because she saw what you were all like." The silence imploded. My father slammed his hands against the table. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. "The will, the stocks, the accounts, the house, all of it. I'm the sole beneficiary. It's legal, it's done." My mother stood up so quickly her chair screeched back against the floor. "That can't be right. Evelyn wouldn't do something so cruel." "Oh, but she would," I said quietly, "because she wasn't blind." Melanie stood next. "Are you joking? This is some kind of stunt." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "But offering your cousin a loan at 2,000% interest. That was." Her mouth opened, then closed. Josh shook his head. "She manipulated her," he muttered. "Grandma was old, she didn't know what she was doing." "She knew exactly what she was doing," I snapped. "She saw you all for who you are, and she gave me the chance to do the same." My father pointed a trembling finger at me. "You tricked us." "I didn't have to," I said. "You showed yourselves. Every time I asked for help. Every time you laughed at me. Every time you treated me like I was small." Zach still hadn't moved. The keys were sitting right in front of him. He looked at me, his voice small. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. "You believed in me when no one else did. You didn't ask for anything. You gave me everything you had, and now I'm giving something back." Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. My father took a step toward me, face red. "You ungrateful little don't," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "You don't get to yell this time, you don't get to twist it. You asked me who I thought I was." I smiled again, smaller this time but firmer. "Well, now you know." I turned back to Zach. "Keys are yours, titles in your name, insurance too, you don't owe me anything." He reached out slowly and picked them up. The metal glinted in his hand. Then he stood up, shoulders straighter than I'd ever seen them, and walked past everyone, through the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door. No one stopped him. The moment stretched like glass about to break. Then I turned, nodded once at the chaos I was leaving behind, and followed my brother out. The next day, I arrived 10 minutes early to the law office. It was a quiet building tucked behind a row of sleepy banks and brick dental clinics, the kind of place no one noticed unless they had business that made them nervous. Inside, the lights were soft, the carpet a neutral beige, and the receptionist offered me a smile that said she'd already had a morning. I took my seat in the small conference room, crossing my legs and folding my arms, watching the second hand on the clock make its slow climb. At 10:03, the storm rolled in. My parents were first, Dad charging through the door like he was about to lead a courtroom drama, Mom right behind him in a sharp blazer, lips pressed tight. Melanie and Josh swept in after, followed by Aunt Clarice, who was already on her phone, muttering something about zoning permits and lost opportunities. Zach came in last. He gave me a quiet nod before leaning against the back wall. No one sat at first. They just stared at me like I had personally rewritten the universe. Then the door opened again. Mr. Thomas, the estate attorney, entered, gray-haired, composed, holding a leather portfolio with both hands like it held the final word of the law. He looked around the room, then cleared his throat. "Good morning. I take it everyone's here regarding the estate of Evelyn Preston." "She was manipulated," my mother said before he could continue. "This whole thing is absurd. She couldn't have known what she was doing." "She was old," Melanie added. "You can't expect anyone to believe she made that choice on her own." "Her mind was going," Dad barked. "She was barely lucid her last few months." Mr. Thomas set down his folder slowly and opened it with a soft snap. "Actually," he said, "Mrs. Preston was thoroughly evaluated by both her physician and an independent specialist just 3 weeks before the will was finalized. Their statements, which I have here, confirm she was of completely sound mind and understood every part of her decision." Silence. Clarice crossed her arms and muttered, "This is outrageous." "She trusted Julia," the lawyer continued. "She named her as sole beneficiary to her personal estate, property, financial accounts, stocks, and all possessions. The documentation is extensive. She made clear her reasoning, and that reasoning was legally sound and deeply personal. Ever even discuss this with us? Dad snapped. She wasn't obligated to, Mr. Thomas said evenly. She believed Julia would be the best steward of her legacy. My mother turned to me, eyes sharp. So you just sat there while she gave you everything, you let us believe there was nothing left. I tilted my head slightly but said nothing. Josh let out a bitter laugh. You really think this makes you look noble? I think it makes me look patient, I said calmly. Grandma wanted me to wait. To see what you do, I kept my promise. Clara scoffed. This is theft. This is legal, the lawyer said, not bothering to hide his irritation now. And final, if anyone here attempts to contest it, I can assure you there are provisions in the will that will disqualify them from even minor inheritance. He let that hang. Melanie slowly sat down like her legs had forgotten how to stand. Josh followed. My parents remained frozen, faces tight with disbelief. Zach looked at me again. Proud. Mr. Thomas closed the folder with a soft click. That will be all. As chairs scraped and mutters rose behind me, I stood, calm and steady. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I walked past them all without a word, my silence heavier than any insult they could have hurled. They came looking for a loophole. What they found was the truth, and I didn't have to lift a finger to deliver it. It started with a voicemail from my mother. Hi, sweetheart, just thinking about you. We were wondering if you'd like to come by for Sunday dinner, just the four of us. Nothing fancy. I didn't respond. The next day my dad texted, got a bottle of that Merlot you liked. Thought we could talk. 2 hours later, by the way, your mother's been thinking about that garden bench Evelyn used to love. Maybe you know where it ended up. The calls kept coming. Sugary, cautious, rehearsed. They didn't scream anymore. Didn't accuse. They poured honey over every word like I might forget the vinegar underneath. And every message ended the same way. We miss you, call us back. I didn't, not out of spite, but because the performance didn't work anymore. One night I sat on the hood of the Mustang next to Zach, parked outside a diner that hadn't changed its menu since the Reagan administration. We were eating fries straight from the paper basket, the cold wind barely bothering us. He nudged me with his elbow. They called again. 3 times today, I said, chewing. Mom even used that voice she saves for baby showers and rich church ladies. He snorted. Let me guess, dinner, wine, sentimental talk about family bonds. I held up a finger. Don't forget the thinly veiled question about my plans for the future, which totally doesn't mean money. Zach popped a fry in his mouth. What did you say? I didn't say anything, I said with a grin. But if they're really desperate, they can always go to Clarice. I hear she rents out things at market rate. Zach nearly choked laughing. We sat in that silence that only comes when you finally know you're not crazy. When someone else saw it too, the games, the masks, the strings attached to every smile. My phone buzzed again. I didn't even check it. Instead, I leaned back and looked up at the night sky. No noise, no tension. Just cold air, stars blinking overhead, and the quiet knowledge that I didn't owe anyone anything. Except the kid next to me. And he never asked in the first place. For the first time in years, the world felt light. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had stopped trying to win people who only saw me as leverage. They wanted something from me now, but they'd have to get in line with the rest of the customers. The beach was almost empty, just a stretch of Carolina sand, scattered shells glinting in the sun, and the slow hush of waves smoothing the shore like breath over skin. I lay back on my towel, arms behind my head, the sun warming every inch of me not already claimed by salt or wind. Next to me, Zach sipped his mango smoothie through a crooked straw and dug his toes into the sand like he still couldn't believe we were really here. A gull screamed overhead. He winced. That thing sounds like Aunt Clarice when her card gets declined, he muttered. I laughed, half choking on my own drink. Don't curse this day with her name. He turned on his side, propping his head on one arm. You know what this beats? What? Every single one of Dad's birthday dinners, I smirked. You mean the ones where we all dressed up so he could act like a king and remind us how much everything cost? He raised his smoothie cup. To birthdays we choose. I raised mine to meet it. And to families that don't come with interest rates. Clink, we drank, and for a while we just listened to the waves. So, what now? Zach asked. I turned to him, squinting. What do you mean? Well, you've got all this money, you passed the test, burned the masks. What's next? Private island, publishing your memoirs? I grinned. Something less dramatic. Like what? I sat up slowly, brushing sand from my legs. I've been thinking about Grandma's house. It's too big for just me, but I want to turn it into something. A library, he joked. A shrine to burnt bridges. Something better, I said. A place for people who don't have anyone else. Teens like you, like I was. Kids who need a place that isn't just a roof, but real safety, real kindness. He looked at me, eyes wide. You serious? I don't want to keep all this money just to prove I have it, I said. I want to use it to build the kind of place Evelyn believed I could. Zach was quiet for a second, then he nodded. She'd love that. I leaned my head on his shoulder. So do I. The sun climbed higher. The tide edged closer. And I realized, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no one left to impress. No one left to chase. Just the truth. And someone who stayed when it would have been easier to walk away.